Welcome to the latest episode of the QuantCurl MoneyWise podcast. I'm George, your host, and I'm excited to bring you the second installment of our series exploring real-life businesses instead of our usual focus on investments. Today, I'm joined by Brad Askew. Brad built a successful online legal services company, which he later sold to a multinational legal insurance company. He recently set up Spring Incubator, a faith-driven program crafted to support entrepreneurs. Now, I've known Brad for several years, and we've often discussed topics ranging from life after selling a business to sharing wisdom about entrepreneurship and business leadership. In fact, Brad was one of the few people who encouraged me when I set up MoneyWise UK. In this episode, we'll explore Brad's journey from building and selling his business to finding purpose and direction afterwards. We'll also explore broader themes around entrepreneurship, success, and the lessons he's learned. So welcome, Brad, and thank you for taking your time today.
Hi, George.
Hi. I was just wondering, could you sort of give us a sort of brief overview of your career journey and what inspired you to take the leap and set up your own business?
Wow. Okay, so I trained as a solicitor at a national law firm in Bristol, and I specialized in civil and consumer law and commercial, specifically the civil and commercial litigation. So fights between people, fights between companies. And I really enjoyed that. It was really good. I got some great skills, but I kept having ideas which I wasn't supposed to be having. I kept saying to my bosses, I was about to be appointed an associate in this national law firm. And I kept saying, why don't we do this? You know, the internet is being used for all these other things. And I kept coming up with what I thought were quite fun ideas to help more people access legal services. And they were lovely about it, but they basically made it clear that deals were done at Hotel Divan with large banks and truckloads of cases would turn up mysteriously. And my job was just to move them from one side of the table to the other and bill and make sure the customers were happy, the clients were happy. And so I kept having all of those sorts of ideas. So I was talking to a friend of mine who was using the internet to try and liberalize and improve financial services. And he was just saying, well, who's doing this in law? So that's where the idea for everything legal began. So that was in 2007. And I just thought, wouldn't it be great if I could, in an industry like law, where we were only just starting to adopt email, they're late adopters, as people might have noticed if they've dealt with solicitors. It's probably changed, and I don't want to generalize. But it was an opportunity just to use the internet to help more people find the right legal advice. So I took the plunge in 2007 and started my company, Everything Legal. And I had a 6-month-old baby. So I had a very, in hindsight, ridiculously understanding wife. And I think we were both oblivious to the risks we were taking. Yeah, but that was the journey, really.
Obviously, kind of taking that journey from setting up a business, you obviously built it into a successful online company and then sold it to this multinational legal insurance company. How did you feel about that? And, because thinking about, selling maybe it's everyone's dream is you build a business and you then sell it. And that has to be quite a significant milestone. So what were your feelings around that? How do you navigate after you've built something, you then sell it? It's your baby, isn't it? Can you just sort of share your thoughts around all of that?
Yeah, it's, you just described it as a bit like your baby. It really is, because on day one, there was nothing. And then there was something. And then as the vision developed, startups aren't ready-made things. They are thoughts that turn into dreams, that turn into ideas. And then ideas turn into minimum viable products where you experiment and find out whether your solution is a solution. And then that turns into something that scales and helps a handful of people. And then it helps many people. And at one point, we were helping over 1,000 people a day, actually, with the services. So that whole journey is very emotive. And to describe it as a baby, that's great metaphor. There are a lot of nappies. There's a lot of mess. There's a lot of learning, like any new dad will know. And I've just had my firstborn Barnabas leave home yesterday to go on his gap year. I drove him to the airport. And maybe it's a bit similar to that, George, where there's a feeling of total pride of what you've built. Like, wow, this is amazing. And I'm so proud of the team. I surprised myself because certainly in my formative years at school, there were many prefects and there were backup prefects, and I was neither. And I wasn't in the sports team and I was in the bottom sets, so I wasn't a likely candidate for the journey. But I remember that the day I finalized the sale, and it was about 10 o'clock at night in the law firm offices of the buyer. And it felt, I think there was so much adrenaline leading up to it, trying to deal with final queries and getting all the bundles together. But then immediately afterwards, there was the sense of achievement, but then there was a feeling of, well, what now? We went for a beer at a local pub with the various lawyers and the corporate advisors. And there was that feeling of, okay, I have just handed control over to another party, which I did knowingly, and it was great for them. I could totally see why the deal made sense. But I was aware that I had started a business with that desire for autonomy to actually put my ideas into practice. And the nature of the transaction is I had given the car keys to them. And I was no longer kind of the ultimate authority. My job was to serve their vision and their strategy and their needs. So there was that process of figuring out, okay, what does this mean? Who am I? Particularly for a lot of guys, without meaning to overgeneralize, there is identity in what we do. So trying to figure out, what does this mean now, where I'm the CEO, but I can't do whatever I want. Whereas on that entrepreneurial journey, you do pivot left and right. You are adapting. You're not like an oil tanker going across the Atlantic. You're a little jet ski, turning left, turning right, thinking something's a good idea and putting it into practice within an hour, changing an entire approach to something. And equally, if something's not working, you just stop immediately. And obviously, that's not the way things work in mature organizations.
Do you think in that process of kind of selling and is there anything you wish you had perhaps done differently during the process? I mean, because we always say hindsight is a fantastic thing, but do you wish that maybe something was done differently? Do you look back and think, actually, no, it was done the best way it could have been done?
Yeah, no, honestly, I don't think there is anything I would do differently now. It is a turbulent time because change is turbulent, but I thought there was a real transparency. I don't feel we all explored the impact on changing cultures. What happens when you mix a bloke who was born in South Africa and loves paragliding and running off cliffs and jumping? What happens if you take that kind of personality and put them in an insurance company that's run by actuaries? I mean, that's a massive cultural change. I mean, I don't think we necessarily explored that much. But no, I weirdly, I had some really great advice from, we had an advisor in London who were just super helpful, and they were a bit like a midwife. They were holding my hand through it, helping me manage expectations, prepare me for the change. So I feel really fortunate on that, because there are so many stories you hear where people say, oh, I wish I'd done such and such differently.
So just exploring that, and you could sort of touched on it just a little bit at the end of when we were talking about the selling of the business, is that you take a business from that kind of vision through to exit. It's a kind of transformationary journey, isn't it? Is that you've got this idea, you've got this dream, and it all comes to life. But then the deal is done, and it's kind of what happens next. How did you navigate the next phase after selling your business? And was it easy to find new opportunities? And perhaps, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to people facing a similar transition?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't underestimate the emotional impact, because we said earlier, it's a bit like the baby. So for me, law, it was a personal problem that I was trying to solve. Not personally, but it impacted me on an emotional level. The fact that in law, if you have insurance or bags of cash, you can get legal advice. But if you don't, it's unlikely you will access legal advice. There's amazing citizens advice bureaus, but there's a problem of access to justice here. And although law firms see problems as just clients and with cases, as I was kind of looking at it, and I read a book called What Would Google Do by a chap called Jeff Jarvis, and it basically explains, and I recommend everyone listening to read it. It was really foundational in my philosophy in the business, which is, how did Google beat Yahoo, who had the biggest brand, and beat Microsoft, who had all the cash in the world? And the answer was through servant leadership. You can't compete with free. Just create value and solve people's problems. And out of the value that is created, you can retain some of that value add down the track. And that's where AdWords came from and AdSense came from. And so for me, law, the problem I was solving is that law was always deeply emotional for people. There were problems. These were real individuals who I was visualizing, people who've lost a job, they've lost a loved one, they found out their partner's cheating on them and they may be separated from their children. Someone has passed away. There's health issues, mental health problems. There are all manner of things that law deals with. And these are all deeply human issues. And so all of these things were so tied up in my why, which is why I built this legal website with 9,000 pages. But when I say I partnered with a university, all the undergraduates, to put all this content on the web, to try and provide all this content for free, no paywall. It's just available then. And then my thesis was, most people don't need a lawyer. But for those that do, I just had a little web form on the right saying, if you need a solicitor, fill in this form and we'll refer you to a panel firm, someone we trust. And that was getting tens of thousands of fill-ins for free. It was a form of marketing. And I was deeply connected with trying to solve this problem of helping people who are dealing with stress. So the goal wasn't to create cases. The goal was just to solve a pressure point for a human being. And so it was very like that, rather than legal marketing, whatever. So when I came out after the sale, I was no longer running with that. Other people were running with us. And so I was really wanting to find, like, well, what next for me? It's a bit like if you've just returned from climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. South Wales is beautiful, but it loses the sparkle, because you think, well, I've just done this amazing thing, and there's this anti-climax, and there's this pressure. I felt like, okay, now I've done that. I should be a serial entrepreneur. I should do this. I should do that. But of course, there's a real timeliness to everything. Everything happens on the first time round. I was in the right place, the right time. I'd been running a team in a national firm, dealing with a lot of the issues I was trying to address. It's very hard to replicate that. Quite often, I think people rush from one success and they therefore don't recognize I don't want to say luck, but just the way things came about. They conflate luck with genius. They think, actually, I must be a genius, and they go and start other things and they just don't work out, and they lose all their money in the follow-on events. Yeah, so for me, I took a time out immediately after the sale. We spent time in South Africa. I'm from there originally, and we were in Cape Town. We were up at White River, spending time with incredible charities, one working with child-led households in sub-Saharan Africa. I also got involved with transformational businesses that are able to really address social problems in South Africa, just social enterprise. And that time was brilliant, just for me to spend time with the family, to detox, and to be able to ask open questions. Again, sort of, what is it I carry intrinsic to Brad? What is it that I enjoy doing? What are the things I'm actually good at? What are those core things? And I'd recommend that sort of time to anyone, to really take that time of reflection. And it feels fallow because you've been running, at 100 miles an hour. So to suddenly be just being and then not doing, it was uncomfortable, but it was absolutely essential. I don't know if I've answered a number of questions there, probably.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I know from our experience and when I've talked to you, we've often had this conversation about trying to find that footing, isn't it, as to what is the next step? What do I do? And I think you're right. Is the one thing I've always felt with you is that you've never wanted to rush into something. You've explored things, but never rushed into something. And there must be that kind of feeling that, oh, I've been really, really successful. I need to have this. And also it's your purpose, isn't it? Or it's your perceived, it's what you are is, if somebody says, oh, what do I do? You say, well, I run a successful business. When you don't have that, it's your clothing has gone. And I guess that kind of follows on to this spring incubator, which you've recently sort of set up. And in fact, I was looking at your website and reading that, and there was one comment I thought was fascinating on there, and I've got questions on here, but it was only as I was reading it today. It says on there about how much does this cost? At this stage, we don't know. So I just found that really, really fascinating. But obviously, with Spring Incubator, it would be really interesting to understand. From my perspective, I kind of have a feeling what inspired you to do this, but it would be good to hear from you as to what inspired you to set this up. How do you hope it will support others, and kind of what are your long term aspirations? Particularly if I look at that comment which says we don't know how much we're going to charge you, so which kind of goes against everything that that we talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it does. And it was not sure how much we're charging, but for now it's free. And the reality is, in supporting other entrepreneurs, everything I don't do consultancy, I don't do paid mentoring or coaching, or everything I do is just because I want to. And I think maybe that's linked to getting an exit from a company. When I did the first company, there are many whys, motivations. But the main one is the mortgage. We'd like to eat, ideally, at least once a day. Got a dog that needs to go to the groomers, although she looks prettier when she's a bit scruffy, to be honest. But there's that why. But afterwards, you need to find a new why. And for me, that became an intrinsic why rather than external. And what I realized is that the sweet spot for me is kind of I'm a creative. I love the process, the very early stage of ideas, taking things from nothing into something. Scaling, doing Series A, fundraising, distribution. There's a lot of people who can do that. But for me, I realized through the journey of starting a business that I'm an ideas factory. I think all human beings are, actually. They just don't realize it. But I'm an ideas factory, and there's something in me that really comes alive when there's an impossible problem, and I love rewiring it. It feels a bit like when I'm talking to an entrepreneur and they've got a startup that isn't working. It feels a bit like just a metaphor I use in my own mind to try and explain what's going on for me on a visceral internal level. It's a bit like Jamie Oliver turning up to a chef and thinking, yeah, that menu isn't going to work. No one's going to buy that stuff. And then him going into the pantry and just looking at everything that's available on the shelf and instantly coming up with 30 new ideas for what the other options. What are the options you're not considering? What are the assumptions you're making? What are the questions you're not asking? And just coming up with an entire new menu just rapidly, like in under 45 seconds. And I find that happens automatically for me. And I really enjoy that formation phase of ideas, turning ideas, and I'm talking about meaningful ideas that solve problems that matter, stuff that improves people's lives. And almost because of the nature of capitalism, every business kind of needs to be a better good or service to survive. Otherwise, they would fail. But I love that, absolutely love that process of helping people turn what feels like a crazy idea into a viable business that has traction and has early adopters and can then scale. And so I've done that since 2012, meeting up with people. I've invested in startups. I've been on the boards of startups, trying to share my own learnings. But the main thing is I just know the journey is so hard. It's solitary. You give up your PAYE. You no longer have a Christmas party to be invited to. It is tough. And the failure rate is high. Somewhere like 90% fail in, over 5 years. It's really difficult finding product market fit because there's so much competition. Particularly if it's a really hard problem. There's a chance people have tried before and failed for really good reasons. And so trying to provide the emotional support to people on that journey, the advice. So that's just been, it's sort of my community. A bit like I've been learning to paraglide, George, as you know. And the people who are so invaluable are the other pilots on the hill who they're not being paid. They're not selling anything. They just come and help you out because they've broken an ankle in the past themselves, and they would just love to see you in the air because it has personal meaning to them. So all of that is to say that is what's led to the Spring Incubator. Of all the stuff that I've done informally is to actually say, wouldn't it be great if I could somehow create a framework like a trellis for this to grow on, so that if there are people, I'm particularly focusing on faith-driven entrepreneurs. I have a strong Christian faith myself, and I'm really inspired by those individuals and movements over the centuries that have really set about solving problems that really matter. And to the incubator is one way I'm hoping to do that. But there are a couple of aspects to it, George. And one is there's the coffee mornings and the burger and beer nights, just so that people can make friends and meet people who understand and find that, common journey, just to encourage one another and say, go for it, don't give up. But then there's also two things that have come out of weirdly the coffee mornings, which is what happens when you get people together, the neurons fire. And the first is the Spring workspace. People are working from their kitchen tables in the cold and getting really lonely, and sometimes going out to coffee shops. And one friend of mine, Neil, said, why don't we set up a shared workspace together? So within about 3 or 4 days, I said, who's up for this? And we have eight people now who are keen. And the idea is we'll do a pop-up shared office space in a church building, beautiful offices, and 100% of the money paid. There are no overheads. No, this isn't a social enterprise. It's not a business. It's not a charity. But the money paid will go to fund work with one of the projects that runs out of that church for people in food poverty in the city of Bristol. Amazing. And it's just a win-win. It's just joining dots, solving problems, then getting out of the way. It's creative problem solving. So that's one thing. And then the other one was the board of directors, where of the entrepreneurs, putting them into, I'm calling it springboards, where putting them into groups of 5 or 6 people. And they meet once a month and can bring any question, any concern, any problem to the group of other CEOs, the other entrepreneurs, just to help each other, just to share wisdom, share experience, share empathy. And just on the view that in a group of 5 entrepreneurs, you probably have enough experience there to solve 80% of problems. And for everything else, we probably know someone between us who can help. So yeah,
I like what you say about it's bringing the informal to the formal. And I know that we have spent many coffees discussing businesses, and it's fascinating when I hear you talk about it. Running your own business is very, very lonely, and your ideas and your creativity is often in your head, and you don't have people to talk about it. And so I think when you talk about the Spring Incubator, you can see how bringing people together from different industries, different backgrounds, it has to work well, doesn't it?
we will see. But so far, just it's the community, and it's all free, George. It's just people caring for other people. It's just joining the dots, and it's like a trellis where the trellis isn't the life, the vine is the life, but the trellis is just enables it to grow up into the sunlight. And the sunlight in this are the relationships where care and concern happen 90% of the time in the context of friendship. So I'm not saying people shouldn't go and get a business coach or any of that. I don't do any of that. But it's just the reality is the best people to help me paraglide are the people who've been flying for 20 years. between them, those people understand and can help. And there's no cost, but there's a high value, massive high value of people we've got people who've grown at every stage of the journey. Some are amazing at operations and logistics. One chap is supplying Google with stuff. Others are, doing social enterprises in Bristol. We've got so many just amazing people who just want to pay it forwards and just get a flywheel where everyone's just helping one another. And that happens automatically when people are around a table.
Yeah. It's interesting when you're talking about the Spring Incubator and the type of people. Do you think entrepreneurs are responsible for positively impacting those around them? Or should they remain solely on business success? So I guess it's that balance between, can entrepreneurs do something positive, or should they be all about business success, whatever that is? And whichever route you kind of go down, are there examples in your experience that kind of support that thought?
Yeah. So are those two things mutually exclusive? If someone is making a profit, are they extracting value from the world around them? Is it a zero-sum game? Obviously, I would lean towards, wealth and opportunity is created. If a farmer has a field full of rocks and he clears the field of rocks and plants grain, wealth is created for that local village. There is additional grain. Whereas I think there can be an assumption that if one person has something, it's been stolen from another person. And, it's like this closed loop and where the strong survive. But obviously I don't see it that way. I guess it would depend on the heart, because certainly I have met business entrepreneurs who became very wealthy, who made me quite nervous, really. They weren't people I felt comfortable with. They didn't seem very kind. They were slightly Machiavellian, dog eat dog. And it was annoying to see them succeed just because the only currency they had was money. There wasn't a relational equity being built. There wasn't necessarily a reputational concern for them about, what the way their grandkids might perceive what they're doing or anything like that. What I would say is, certainly the people I deal with, on the whole, the entrepreneurs are dreamers and creators. They are taking massive risks, so they probably care about what they're doing. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. They should just go and keep their day job. And, I'm just so fortunate to be around lots of entrepreneurs who are really transforming, changing the culture in the city. One close friend of mine, Neil, started Urban Pursuits here in Bristol, probably known to many of your listeners. And they help those at risk of exclusion in schools. And they basically, in my language, not theirs, their website will describe it differently, but they do extreme sports and get into nature, go mountain biking. They do Bear Grylls type stuff. And it's an absolute winner. It's solving a problem for, it's really meeting a need, and it's enabling people to flourish. That is so, so cool. And they make a profit doing it, a fair profit. But I suppose the alternative to making a profit is to make a loss, in which case you have to stop immediately unless you have someone to give grants year after year after year, or an investor who doesn't really know what they're doing. And that does happen actually sometimes. So that's amazing. There's another new friend, and he's got a PhD in chemistry and has the patent on enabling people within inhalers for the steroids to be 40% more effective at being absorbed. What a solution, really resolving problems. Then you've got chaps like Elon Musk, who's a bit of a Marmite character. He's not in my group, I should add. He never returns my call. But he's a Marmite sort of character, and he's a billionaire and all of that type of stuff. But Starlink is incredible in the way it's going to deliver education and healthcare to the developing world in the way people have only dreamed. And that could be amazing. The fact that in rural areas, in the places that don't have internet, suddenly there is access to healthcare and education. So maybe that Elon Musk is an example of where it's both and. Is this wheat or is this weeds? Leaving politics to one side, I don't know. but I know some of the products and services are really transformational for people. So I am definitely committed to the idea that business can be a force for good and that profit can be made responsibly and reallocated back into other ideas that serve people. Absolutely. But I also can see why some people would be, view that as a bit naive.
Yeah.
um,
It's really interesting when you talk about, because I think that is the thing, is that everybody, you have a dream, don't you? And you start out because you want to do something different. And it's, does money become the thing that drives you in the end, or do you hold on to those dreams? And it's not that you can't have the money and still keep the dreams, but there is always that danger, isn't it? Is that money can become the bit that drives you. But thinking about being an entrepreneur, what insights have you gained about entrepreneurship along the way?
hmm. Oh, that's a great question. So I did a law degree, not a business degree. And I've never done a business course. And I probably should have done in hindsight. But I do. I've read loads and loads of books. And I think I learned the difference between gross and net profit on Dragon's Den. Terrible. And I'd already started my business. And it's a common story. But I think one of the main insights on entrepreneurship is the competitive advantage. I used to think that these big organizations that are like oil tankers, who can compete against them? They're formidable, they're powerful. But what I learned is that actually when you are small, you have a massive competitive advantage. You're like a jet ski. You can turn left, you can turn right, you can go around, you can literally run circles because you can come up with an idea, build a prototype or a minimum viable product before the proposal's even gone to the first meeting in the big company. And so you have to place that advantage. So I'd say adaptability is the competitive advantage. And in the Darwin world, survival of the fittest, what is the super strength of an entrepreneur? It has to be adaptability, the freedom to change your mind quickly, the ability to gather data, the ability to make mistakes because they're little. A big bank can't make big mistakes because it impacts 12 million customers. As a startup, you can make a mistake and just phone people if something goes wrong, depending on what you're doing, of course. So I think adaptability would be one thing. That is a massive superpower. The thing people think disqualify them from success is the very superpower that they should be leaning into. And maybe that the second thing is the value of relationships, George. It's all about relationships. You need to ask people for help. You need to say, I don't think I know what I'm doing. Can you help? When you're finding partners to maybe distribute, you need to say, please, I can't do this without you. And it's amazing, just that charm offensive of just asking people for help and, realizing that people work with people they like. And I'm not saying you make friends with people. It's never a good look when someone's networking to exploit someone. I'm not meaning that. That really annoys most people. But more just leaning into connecting with people and being authentic. Tell them you're struggling. Yeah, so those two things, adaptability and developing emotional intelligence with relationships and realizing that so many people really want to help, but you need to ask.
Yeah. And I guess that leads quite nicely onto the next one, is that I guess if I look at myself and setting up MoneyWise UK, I still kind of don't necessarily see it as a business, but I mean, the reality it is. And I guess one of the questions is, do you believe that entrepreneurship is a skill that anyone can develop? Or is it something that is kind of inside you already? Was Elon Musk, did he come out as an entrepreneur, or is it something that he develops?
Yeah, I firmly believe it's a mix, George. There are definitely personality traits of an entrepreneur, like, resilience, curiosity, comfort with risk. doing things that are uncertain. Those things are personality traits. So I think if you are someone who's willing to do stuff and fail, willing to have 20 people hang up on you on a day if you're trying to sell a product in its early days, that is a personality trait. But I think there's a danger of idolizing entrepreneurs. Sometimes entrepreneurs want to say, no, we're born, not made, because it makes them feel a bit special. But I think everyone is an ideas factory. And whenever someone sees a problem and thinks they have a solution to it, that right there is latent entrepreneurship that isn't being potential isn't being fulfilled. And it could be because, it's just a dream. What do I know? Just disqualifying yourself rather than joining something like the Spring community and going for coffee or like we've done, George, over the years. We just talk about ideas, but we treat them as roads to nowhere. Let's just talk about it because it's quite fun. And you never know where that will lead. And it might be that first idea is not good, but it's a stepping stone to another thing that is brilliant and everyone would love. There's a book called The Power of Unreasonable People, and it's based on a quote by Sir Arthur Bernard Shaw, where I'll paraphrase, I might not get the quote exactly right, but it says something like, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world he lives in. The unreasonable person seeks to change the world to fit his idea of what it should be. Therefore, all progress depends on unreasonable people. So I love that. There's something unreasonable in seeing a problem and saying, not on my watch. I hate this. I hate the fact that X. What can we do about it? Is there a solution to this problem? Is there a solution to a food poverty problem? Is on a tiny, tiny level, because I'm dealing with entrepreneurs in the city of Bristol, not sub-Saharan Africa here, but people are lonely and they'd love to work together, be able to go for a beer after work on a Friday, bounce ideas, have a sigh, have a rant, all those things that are quite good for our well-being. Is there a solution? And, maybe we should get a shared workspace. Maybe that will solve that. And it will solve this other problem, help people who are helping those in food poverty. So I think a lot of people have these ideas all the time, but they don't act on them. And maybe that's the personality trait. Everyone gets the ideas, but the entrepreneurs are the people who act on them, knowing they'll probably fail.
Yeah.
So that's where it's a mix. But then you end up where you get people who are willing to just act on that, get people around them and say, that's not silly at all. What's the cheapest way you can test that idea? It might be possible for a few £100 to test your solution and see what people think. YouTube started as a dating site, and they realized people weren't using it for dating. They were posting videos of cats on there. And they could have said, I'm so silly, this YouTube is rubbish. But guess what? They just pivoted and it's doing quite well these days.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of, I guess we've sort of answered this is one of the biggest opportunities and challenges for entrepreneurs is there are so many opportunities, aren't there? But like everything, there's challenges. So what would you think around that?
Well, on the one hand, it's never been easier to start. You can go on Wix, Squarespace, 123 Reg, any of these, and you can be up and running in the next 60 minutes. Your website will be up. You can go on any of the AIs and just say, make me a logo of such and such. And and I've literally done this. It's brilliant. It's so quick. It's £200 a year to basically set up your stall. And in theory, you've got access to the whole world, but you still need a product or service that is better. So on the one hand, it's easy, but I guess the rules of capitalism are that in a free market, the returns are diminished over time. If one person's making money, if one farmer's making loads of stuff, all the other farmers plant the same stuff until the return comes down and down and down until you get to the cost of capital, which I guess is something like Tesco-like returns, or I don't know, your audience will know, but it'll be low single-digit percent returns in real terms, enough to justify doing it, but not a penny more. And so I think that is the difficulty of the ease has meant that it's very difficult to be unique. So people need to now be more careful about brands. They need to be more careful about, are they just I'm doing the same as everyone else, or is there a product or a service that solves someone's problem uniquely in a way that they say, please, can I have it? Where do I pay? That actually solves my problem. And so the only way of solving that is to go and take your idea and spend time with the customers, the people you want to buy, and saying, I'm thinking of building this. Does this solve your problem? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? And just keep reiterating as quickly as possible until that client is saying, I really want this. And once you get to that, you can scale. But I think too many people are thinking about scaling to the whole universe without building a simple niche solution that the user loves, not likes, they absolutely love it because they can't find it anywhere else.
Can you be a kind and empathetic entrepreneur for success? And we're going to talk about success as one of the questions, but for success to happen, you have to have a ruthless edge.
Yeah. We've got the word, hopefully not ruthless, but you do need to be decisive because you've got finite time and cash. And if you run out of either the patience of my wife or, run out of money, you have to stop. So you do need to be really decisive. A bit like that jet ski. It's great for turning left and right, but unlike an oil tanker, it can't weather big waves. It can't say, oh, let's give everyone 3 months, whatever. You don't have the money. You're not actually paying yourself a lot of the time. You're taking a haircut on what you were earning at the PAYE job. So you do need to be decisive. And maybe for people who are coming from either a large company or the public sector, it could be perceived as ruthless, but really it's trying to conserve very finite resources because the odds are against you. The failure rate is 90%. And therefore, in order to succeed, maybe you need to have 10 ideas running in tandem. And then people could say, oh, but you just changed your mind without telling anyone. I thought you were doing this and now you're doing that. And that is intrinsic to that journey. But certainly a lot of the founders I know are very kind people. They're very creative. They're dreamers. They're building something they actually care about. I think it takes a lot of courage to start something. And, so many of the founders I know who've started stuff, they've ended up taking that expertise on how to build things and how to think outside the box and how to imagine alternate futures, the vision casting of we could do this, well, we could do that. And they've all become trustees of charities. They've applied that creative problem solving in different contexts with amazing results. So yeah, I don't think people need to be ruthless. I don't think that at all. But it's certainly, there are certain behaviors that are quite pointy and quite sharp because of the nature of the. I don't know if I make what do you think?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. It does. I guess it's who you are as a person, isn't it? Is that you can be a kind person, but at the same time you have to make decisions, and sometimes those decisions are going to be uncomfortable for people, and those decisions sometimes are easier for people to understand, aren't they? If you're a kind person, if they understand who you are. And I guess it does also come on to this thing about success, isn't it? Is that we've darted around this, and I've talked about you building a successful online business. And I think in our world, isn't it, is that success is measured in terms of wealth, status. And I guess a good thing to think about is, how do you define success personally? And do you think that perspective has changed over time? Because I think maybe that does come into that question around being kind and empathetic and also decisive as an entrepreneur, doesn't it? I think it probably does lead into that a little bit. It's what your view of success is, probably defines you as a person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A definition of success. It's a really hard question. And yeah, and the follow-on thought from the previous thing as well is, in a small boat, if there's a problem, you've got to think of the other people on the boat. So that it could be seen as brutal, but one chap I've been meeting with has a situation, if there's a member of staff where it's just not working out, most things are existential risks to a small business. And if it is possible just to chill and take a long view, people would, but that isn't available. So it's also thinking of the bigger picture. How does my not taking action impact everyone else here? You know, and so there is actually thinking about what looks like a brutal decision, but actually when you zoom out and look at the wider impact, it actually could be quite loving and kind for the whole, the larger group of people. But yeah, the definition of success, I think as a young man, which I still very much am, sort of, but when I was in my 20s, I realized that an older entrepreneur said to me in the process of setting up my business that he thought the motivation that a lot of entrepreneurs have is that they want to prove the world wrong, that they've been told they can't, that they're not good enough. Brad, you can't be a prefect. You're not in the sports team. You're not this, you're not this. And there's that, like, I've got what it takes. I need to, to whoever I don't even know who I'm talking to, but I need to prove them wrong, that I am a man. I can stand up and I can build something, and or maybe prove it to myself even. That's maybe if someone has a fear of heights, that's why they go to the top diving board, because they don't want to be afraid of heights. They're still terrified of heights, but that's why they do it. It's to face a fear and live the dream and all of that. So that was definitely part of that journey. But as I've become a dad, been married 25 years this July, I think the stuff that is success, I think, are the things that are just meaningful on a heart level. And for me, as a Christian, is to live a life that pleases God, which is to see people loved where there is pain and suffering, to be part of, on the correct side of trying to help with that. I think it's having the care, love, and respect of those I care, love, and respect, which isn't a million people. There's a small number of people who are close friends who I want to have in my life. I want to see my children doing well. I love the feeling of just that kick you get at the end of the day. I suppose if you keep coming back to farming, I guess a farmer having plowed a whole field, at the end of the day, he just stands back. He hasn't sold anything, but he's just plowed the land, and he just feels, that looks good job done. And I think I get that real sense of satisfaction and meaning from having helped someone, thinking, oh, it's so cool that I can take a bit of my struggle or my pain and translate that into something that's useful to help someone else. So they found some peace. They've solved a problem. They are going to sleep better tonight. And I was able to somehow redeem some of my own tears, some of my own struggle in that way. And that gives me a real sense of achievement. So I guess it's non-monetary. It's intrinsic reward of feeling like, well, that matters. Or, seeing the fruit of my life not having to grow on my branches. They can grow on the branches of other people's life. Just seeing someone else flourish and just, again, like their farm, stand back and just have a quiet smile. That joy on the inside where you just feel absolute delight that someone is doing really well. And you are, in an unspoken way, a part of that story. And whether they see it that way or not, it creates close friendships, where you just feel close to people, you feel vested in them, and then you see them having, so a bit of I have a dream speech almost I'm doing. I'm not meaning to, but I guess I'm really passionate about it. Then seeing other people who've been really cared for, then without prompting, just becoming their modus operandi, them caring for others and just creating that flywheel of care rather than ruthlessness, where in the world of business, there can be just so much taking and grabbing rather than serving and supporting. So yeah, success for me would definitely look like staying in my lane, or my own gifting? What are the things I'm good at? It's very narrow. It's imagining futures that don't exist yet and creatively coming up with problems to solutions and helping other people imagine them, describing what I see, rewriting the menu based on the ingredients that I've observed, in their metaphorical pantry, and then all the relationships.
Yeah. And I think that's just been fascinating, is kind of that, what is success, and just seeing that kind of success. I think you're right, is often, I guess, when I set up the business that I run, is that someone was saying to me, but what happens if the business is hugely successful and the directors make all this money and you're not part of that? But I am part of that, because if I've helped them to achieve it, then for me, that is something I can look at with satisfaction. And I think it is, we do get confused between money and status. And actually, often, sometimes it is actually just, can we help people, and can we see that? And sometimes we don't see that. We, as you say, we kind of sow the seeds and something happens down the line. Brilliant. Today's been so interesting. And I always sort of end these podcasts with something that is for you to think about, for you to share with people who are listening. And so much I could ask you, and some of this you've answered, but if someone was looking to set up a business today, is there something you wish you had known when you started your business? And then if you could give one key piece of advice to aspiring entrepreneurs, what would that be?
I think I sort of disqualified myself because I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't, but I thought that was a disability. I thought I was destined to fail as a result, but actually what it meant is I was a blank canvas. I was able to ask open questions. I was able to turn up without a bias. I was able to actually go and find the answers. And so I think one thing I wish I'd known is that the people, that everyone is on a journey. Everyone's figuring stuff out. Just because people have all the lingo and they use all these clever terms, a lot of those people wouldn't be able to start a business, actually, because they are sort of the difference between a lion in the Serengeti and one at a Bristol Zoo, as wild places. They're very different animals, in terms of their ability to hunt and gather. Actually, that may not be true. I don't know, but let's go with it. I'm sure they'd both be fine, and I wouldn't like to face either of them. So that I think that is one thing, that don't disqualify yourself from exploring things. That I think if there is a problem that bothers you, you can educate yourself, particularly now with YouTube, to what is the problem? What is one problem you would love to solve? And how are you going to do it? Think about it. Don't assume that there is a skill set or qualification to solve it. Don't assume that everyone else has the same idea, because most people are just caught up on the treadmill. Most people are not thinking about it. And those that do, most are not going to do anything about it because of really good human reasons, emotions, fear, anxiety, imposter syndrome, all of those. So if you have something, to go with it. And the best way to do that is to find a community of other people who have walked down that road, because they'll be like the experienced paragliding pilots who helped me. They're the people who will have total empathy. They won't make you feel stupid. They will give total support and encouragement. They'll, build you up, hopefully, and maybe to connect with an incubator, not necessarily the thing I'm doing, but, connect with, whether it's Set Squared, one of the Spark things linked to the banks. There are so many of these things these days, but certainly connect with other people who've been down this road and ask them if they could just open up their network and help you take things forward. Just initially over a cup of coffee, just have a conversation and say, oh, I have this idea. What do you think? And just to get the conversation going.
I just want to say thank you, Brad, because over the hour we've talked about so many things, and I was looking at my notes as I was scribbling down, and I think there were two things that came out, and they're very random. So one is this idea that we're all idea factories. And I think we can all relate to that, is that, we are those people. And I love that word of a superpower. I think that's something to hold on to, isn't it? It's a superpower. And I think, thinking about success and giving things back, all of that's been fascinating. And also you being honest with, what happens once you have success, in inverted commas, however you want to call it, but selling a business and then all of a sudden you're on your own, and kind of finding your feet. So really, really appreciate your time today on that. Thank you. And what I just sort of say to anyone who's listening today is that if they would like to know more about Spring Incubator, there is a website, which is springincubator.co.uk. And on there, you can find more information, and there's contact information. So I'm sure Brad would be happy to hear from you. Obviously, you can visit my website for more details on MoneyWise UK. Thank you very much, Brad, today for your time. And thank you for people for listening.
Pleasure.
Thank you.